President Cyril Ramaphosa met with Eskom's board yesterday to establish why the country was plunged into darkness for 7 consecutive days and what led to stage 6 load shedding on Monday. The president said a number of factors led to the blackouts, which include breakdowns, wet coal, aging equipment, and most worryingly, an act of sabotage which led to 2,000 megawatts being lost. Ramaphosa cut short his trip to Egypt on Monday to address the power crisis after he was heavily criticized for leaving the country in darkness. In studio with us, political analyst Khaya Sithole is with us to discuss this further. Good to have you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning to the viewers.
All right, so sabotage, what did you make of this rationale behind what's been happening with load shedding?
I switched off the TV when that was said. I think the problem, of course, is that we now have to make peace that somewhere between the board of Eskom, the chairman and the interim CEO of Eskom and the minister and perhaps the presidency, someone is lying to us.
Yeah.
Because the reality here is that if you're going to argue that one individual has got the ability to walk into a power station, switch off a switch, take 2,000 megawatts off the grid and no one knows about this until 7 days later, it indicates that perhaps at Eskom we have an even bigger operational and management crisis than what you thought before. So I think this idea of saying that it was an act of sabotage, we really have to interrogate it. Who did it? How did you find out that it had happened? And what have you done about it? Because at the back of that, the president then makes this extraordinary commitment that between a particular time frame, he guarantees that there'll be no load shedding. Now, for an entire period, we were told that the weather primarily was the reason because it had flooded the power stations and the coal was wet. So unless the president has developed powers on his way back from Egypt of preventing it from rain or perhaps protecting the coal or insulating it from the weather, somebody has been lying to us and we need to find out who that is.
Well, that's the reality, and it's so difficult to believe anybody at the moment because there are so many stories that have been given. And, you know, getting back to sabotage, one would think that in order to claim it's sabotage, you would need some hard facts, some evidence, something presented to us that would say, look, this is exactly what happened. We know it as a fact, as opposed to, you know, kind of, well, you know, this was sabotage, but nothing to prove it.
Yeah, and remember, this is not the type of thing that you can leave to the natural laws of justice to say this person must be held before a hearing, they must state their case. If this person has sabotaged an entire country, you must dispense with all the niceties and simply say, this person, here's their name, here's what they've done, and you must explain to us what is going to be done to them next. And remember, this will not be a new thing when it comes to Eskom, because the president in January 2018, extraordinary in his capacity as deputy president, took to issuing an instruction to the Eskom board that they must dismiss 2 employees when he had no legal authority to do so. So if they're saying that somebody sabotaged the system, there are only 40,000 people that work at Eskom. There are probably a specific number of people that work at a particular power station. There are an even smaller number of people who would have checked in to that particular station at that point in time when this thing happened. So we're not asking to investigate 50 million citizens. Tell us exactly who are the 10 people that were on site when this happened, and then one of them must come and explain to us what happened. So to just leave it there as an abstract thing, never to follow up on it and to simply say, oh, sorry, somebody sabotaged it, we don't know who it is, but eventually we'll find out, simply means that people are not going to take this seriously. And the problem, of course, is that you now have to start wondering, will anyone ever believe the president when he makes pronouncements regarding Eskom when literally he doesn't give us anything to work with?
So out of all the I nearly said excuses. Out of all of the reasons given for what's been going on, stage 6 load shedding, I mean, unprecedented. We've never had it before. I mean, it was, you know, something that took everybody by storm. It was suddenly, but does anybody have the schedule? Does anyone know what it is? What is happening? What do you actually think is going on?
Well, I wouldn't say it took everybody by storm, because the president somehow failed to know that it was happening until he was in the middle of the air flying over to Egypt.
Well, I mean, he even said he was shocked.
Yeah, so it appears that they only told the people they were going to be the victims of the shedding, which is you and I. Now, the problem, of course, even with that particular statement, you then have to ask yourself the question again, this is a crisis moment. So you've got a board, you've got an executive officer, you've got the chairman, you've got a minister. They're about to activate the most extraordinary level of load shedding that's ever been experienced in the country. Are they now arguing that at no point in time did someone think of informing the president that, oh, by the way, we are about to activate something that's never been done before. This is something that is topical. This is something that people are talking about. So at least be aware that it's happening. So for him to claim that he probably stumbled upon a news article while he was, you know, waking up from a nap in the middle of the African continent and say, oh, dear God, we've got stage 6 load shedding, we have to call it out for what it is. It's absolute nonsense. Because if that is happening, he should have said yesterday that actually I think the communication channels between Eskom, the minister, and myself are inadequate. Between Eskom, the minister, and the deputy president, who, let us remember, is the one in charge of government business, clearly there's been a breakdown in communication there. And the president needs to start calling people to account. For him to simply say that I'm going to apologize without actually telling us that the reason we're here is because of this person. Nobody's saying that Cyril Ramaphosa must solve load shedding. Somebody is saying to us, please tell us exactly what's going on so we can plan our lives around it.
Yeah.
Now, if you make all these pronouncements that you can't back up, it is problematic for us because we literally don't know what the state of the country is. Did he pray that there'd be no rain today? He probably did, because if there's no rain, then Eskom at least cannot argue that, oh, we've got a wet coal problem. So now the question, if it starts raining tomorrow, if it starts flooding in Mpumalanga tomorrow, will he then come back and say, well, in addition to the sabotage, God himself has decided to screw us over? What exactly is the story? We don't know.
We don't know, and we don't know who to believe anymore, and that's the reality. Sabotage, cable theft, wet coal, as you mentioned. We've also been promised, and I'd like to discuss this for a little bit, we've been promised that we will not have any load shedding over Christmas from the 17th of December until, when is it, in January the 3rd?
I think it actually starts 17th to the 13th of January.
Yeah, how can you make these assurances? I mean, we've been promised we would not have load shedding in this country before, but now we're saying we're not going to have load shedding when suddenly these things happen overnight. How can we believe anything we're told these days?
Well, the first part of it is just the lack of the draw, because remember, this is a point in time where big industries are shutting down, so there's going to be a lightened burden on the grid in the first place. That's the first thing that is gambling on. The secondary thing is that obviously he must have applied his mind to assume that this person who sabotaged the grid, or the people who sabotage the grid, are mysteriously going to be on leave, or they're not going to be at work during this particular time frame. But yet again, we then have to ask the question, on what basis does an executive leader of an entire country give assurances relating to an operational entity where he literally said himself a couple of days ago he hadn't been to its biggest problem, Medupi Power Station, until a couple of weeks ago? So did he actually receive a report that said, well, actually, we've identified what the capacity of the grid is over the next couple of months, we've worked out the permutation, so what happens if it rains? So what happens if somebody trips another switch and we take another 2,000 megawatts? And in spite of all of this, we can guarantee that electricity will be carrying on. In the absence of that, he was really just politicking, and unfortunately, he has now put his name alongside a statement that says, I'm making this particular guarantee. Of course, they can always make sure that that happens by going for the expensive options of using diesel, whatever the case might be. We on the outside will never know what it will cost for them to meet that particular commitment that is made. And then the question, of course, is what is so unique about the 14th of January where suddenly this guarantee has to disappear?
Yeah, indeed. Well, that's the million-dollar question, which I don't think we'll find an answer to.
Yeah.
What do you make of our president at the moment and the state-owned enterprises? We know that they're all in a very, very difficult situation now. But the leadership, the direction that they're going in, I often wonder whatever happened to that Italian. Remember the whole story?
The Italians with the Armani suits.
Are they in the country? What's happening there?
Nobody can remember.
Nobody remembers. Okay, so I remember. That just jumped into my mind now. But the whole story around most of these, I mean, we're looking at SAA, we're looking at Eskom, we're looking at the leadership, we're looking at the board, we're looking at all of these things. How is it all being managed? I mean, what are your views right now?
So you firstly asked what I think about the president. We have a real possibility that the president has become too trusting. And his trusted people who quite simply don't have the capability to deliver on the portfolios that is allocated to them. Is it possible that the Minister of Public Enterprise is overstretched? Look, he has crisis moments wherever he turns. If he wakes up and you talk about Denel, that's a crisis. If you talk SAA, that's a crisis. If you talk Eskom, that's a crisis. So he's literally become a crisis manager overnight. Does he have the capacity to actually deal substantively with each of these entities and actually show us what the turnaround strategy is? I don't think so. And remember, Mr. Pravin Gordhan seems to have cemented, his philosophy on the idea that all that went wrong in these entities was just the governance. So therefore, if I can change the board at Eskom, they change the board at Denel, or change the board at SAA, that will be the solution. But of course, that isn't the only thing that has happened. If you look at SAA, for example, the market evolution, the market forces overtook what SAA was doing. So even if you change the board overnight, the question will be, do you still have a viable business case? And he's of the opinion that it was just a governance thing. There were all these state capture comrades that were all over the show. Well, you've you've had 2 years to get rid of them. You've told us that you've got rid of them. At some point in time, that excuse starts to lose currency. We need to know exactly what it is that you've identified with the issues. What are you doing about them, and what are we doing going forward? You also cannot argue to us that, it was a governance challenge. I fixed the governance challenges when you're talking about an entity that cannot produce financial statements for a 2-year period, because they've violated every single reporting guideline and every single reporting requirement. So then the question would be, is this what you put forward as a governance team? So I do think that perhaps the president has been too trusting of particular ministers, and perhaps the Minister of Public Enterprises is simply way too stretched in his portfolio. So in that regard, the president at some point in time has to take the view of saying, well, I've had 2 years to actually deal with this particular problem. What have been the good, positive steps, and what are the things that are still glaring out there? And unfortunately, in the Eskom case, it seems that for every one step forward, there's a few steps backwards, and that is the most biggest problem, because Eskom is the most pervasive and the most important of all these entities. Perhaps somebody dedicated to it should be allocated. Another question should be, does it belong at public enterprises? Does it belong at energy? Or should it simply now have a direct reporting line to the president? We don't know how he's thinking, and unfortunately, he's not very good at telling us that this is my reasoning, this is what I'm thinking, help me work with this process, and if something goes wrong, at least I'll be able to tell you what the issues are. So it's becoming frustrating for everyone, where somebody says, you must at some point in time put your foot down and say, Minister X, Y, and Z, you're embarrassing me. You made these commitments, this is what you said you're going to do, why is it not happening? How many instances of load shedding have we had since Mr. Pravin Gordhan was reinstalled at public enterprises? That is the crux of the answer.
If we may turn our attention as well to another minister, and the DA are going out and against the Mineral Resources Minister as well, and saying that Gwede Mantashe has to take some of the blame as well, particularly with regard to IPPs, and he should be allowing this to go ahead, and people are desperate, and that this is one of the solutions offered. But do you think he's doing enough?
I think the problem, of course, comes back to the question of what is the ANC policy in relation to enabling other parties to participate in alleviating the pressure on the grid. And I think historically there's always been this tension of, should it be an exclusive domain of Eskom, and if you allow other parties to do so, on what parameters should you do so? And I think in this particular instance, that matter remains unresolved. So we then have to go back to the president again and say, look, you actually now need to make that call. Do you then want to enable or, unleash that potential power energy sources that can be unleashed if the energy plan, the integrated resource plan, is actually implemented overnight? What difference do you think it's going to make, and what are you doing about it? So I do think that when you've got all these tensions between ANC policy, the government mandates, and what society needs and what the crisis demands, then you find that people become paralyzed by simply too many ways of thinking, too many alternatives, and no singular decision is to be made. But of course, isn't that why you appoint somebody called the president, who then is to say, in spite of all the multiple differences of opinion across the table, this is the line of march, and let's go with it.
Well, I mean, that is an ideal situation, which is unfortunately at this point not happening. So we also saw the ANC's NEC meeting, obviously being spoken to us, and the outcomes of that meeting. And I quote what was said after the briefing is that the NEC said they will be taking a comprehensive approach to SOEs. What does that mean?
It means absolutely nothing.
Okay.
So it's one of those things that you hear like, oh, that sounds wonderful. What is a comprehensive approach? Are they saying right now they've got some half-hearted approach? What would a comprehensive approach mean? Because in most of these instances, with perhaps the exception of AXA, they are 100% shareholders of these particular entities. So they are fully in command and fully in control of what happens there. So for them to now say that we're going to take a comprehensive approach, and a comprehensive approach to doing what? You are the ones that decide who to appoint, you're the one who decides who to fire, and you're the one that tell these people what to do. So this thing of saying that something far more comprehensive is now going to be the way of doing things, I'm like, what on earth does it mean? But of course, sometimes you listen, you read, you're like, that was 2 minutes or 2 seconds of my life that I'll never get back because I've heard nothing of substance, and the person who said it doesn't even know what they've just said to us.
Yeah. You know, quite a telling interview that was held this week was with Mondli Ngobele. I'm sure you saw that one. Former Deputy Finance Minister and, of course, a member of the NEC. He came out and said, as much as he says that the blame for the state of electricity, Eskom, lies squarely with the governing party. Coincidentally, I also gave this question to Matsilo Koko, who came to visit us yesterday, and he said, that is what's going on with Eskom. It is a power battle within the ANC, and that is the reason that everything is the way it is. Can we believe that? I mean, is that a good enough excuse or reason?
Look, I think Mondli, when he says that we're actually fully responsible for this crisis at ANC, he's perfectly right. The problem is that Mondli is an exception rather than the way of thinking in the ANC, because what you want people to do is to acknowledge the fact that we were given a mandate to govern the country for 10, 20 or 25 years. We thought this was the way to go, but obviously reality has told us otherwise, so therefore we need to change tack. Now, I think historically that sense of accountability has never existed. And remember, the ANC's got this wonderful model where plausible deniability exists for everyone, because there's not a singular person who's actually responsible for what was done or not done in a particular entity. It's something called a collective responsibility.
Yeah.
And collective responsibility means that there's actually an accountability vacuum, because you cannot point to one person and say, actually, it was your decision, it was your recommendation that got us here. So for an NEC member to come out and say, well, actually, we've screwed up this process, it's a good way of acknowledging what the issues are, but I don't think that suddenly the ANC is going to change the way it does things and say, well, actually, now we're going to hold one particular ministry, one particular individual to account, so that people will know exactly who's responsible for what. And remember, had that been done for Kusile and Medupi, we'd at least know today that this person is responsible for the delays, for the cost overruns. But right now, even if you wanted to ask who exactly was responsible for ensuring these things are finished in time, nobody knows.
Nobody knows, and there's just allegations right now. There is still no legal processes. There is still no court action, responsibilities, anything leveled on anybody, and it's just allegations that you're reading everywhere and you don't know what to believe, and that's the reality. I mean, on that note, let's take a look at some of the tweets, because people have been talking to us on Twitter and sharing their views of the Eskom situation and basically what's been happening with government. Notorious Mabilani saying, I need more than a media briefing to believe that government is concerned and doing something about electricity problems in Mzansi. How can you go out looking for investments when you don't have electricity at home? That is a sign of madness and foolishness. All right, another one coming here from Sisheko saying, there's nothing like sabotage. ANC talks good things but fails to implement. Thabo Mbeki and Jay-Z said the same but never happened. Why ANC not accept the fact that corruption has brought Eskom to its knees? SA is in big trouble. Eskom is being captured. And finally, Nati Mate saying, I still don't trust anything they say. Seemingly, no one knows exactly what needs to be done at Eskom. The whole entity is in total disarray. There are no practical solutions in sight. So, I mean, you know, these are South Africans sharing their views. And you and I sit and listen to South Africans and hear what they have to say. And they're feeling very disillusioned at this point in time.
And you can't fault them. You can't fault them, because remember, the consequences of Eskom being in the condition that it's in, it's not just an energy crisis. This becomes an economic and a social crisis, because remember, the people that woke up over the past 7 days trying to get to work, only to get to work and told that you can't work because there's no electricity. Now that's a cost to the small business owner who's actually had to open his shop floor, who has to pay these people when no production is taking place. This is frustrating for people who feel that, you know, actually we woke up planning on coming to do particular things and now we're being paralyzed from doing it. And remember, Eskom's greatest crime is not the fact that load shedding happens. It's the fact that it is so random and haphazard. It really paralyzes us. It denies all of us the ability to plan our lives around it, to say, well, actually, we know that over the next 7-day period, during these time frames, there is no power, so therefore, let me be at an alternative place. If I need to work, let me work somewhere else. So denying us just that ability to manage our own affairs is probably the greatest sense of frustration with Eskom, because now we've made peace with the fact that we clearly have capacity problems when it comes to electricity provision. That's fine, but enable us to be able to say, well, actually, this is how we're going to organize our lives. And that inability, for me, is the one thing that we really cannot forgive Eskom for. Give us something to work with, and at this stage, it is random. Last night, they issued one press statement to say, well, we're just doing away with load shedding, and then 5 minutes later, they said, like, oh, by the way, it's going to be back tomorrow.
Yes, yes.
And you're thinking, somebody must have said that, and at this stage, those messages are so critically important. It can be just some staffer or an intern that says, let me issue a particular statement to the country to say there's a state of load shedding. This is probably the most important document exchanging hands at Eskom this week. So everybody must be on board and say, yes, I, as the chief operating officer of Eskom, approve this statement, because it's an indication of what we're going to do. And of course, there's always that line that says, remember, load shedding is not a crisis. It's a managed process to ensure that you don't suffer blackouts. And I'm like, well, thank you for doing us a favor. But all we wanted to do was get electricity and pay for it. We're not asking you for favors.
Yeah, let's leave it there. Khaya, thank you so much for talking to us here on the program. All of this information around Eskom and what's been going on in the latest reasoning behind the stage 6 load shedding and what's been happening. Political analyst Khaya Sithole talking to us about President Cyril Ramaphosa's briefing yesterday about Eskom. All right, and Eskom just happens